This is Their Future, Our Pod. I'm your host, Annie Andrews. This is a pod mostly about politics, a lot about kids, but it's going to be about a lot of other stuff too. Thanks for joining me. Their Future, Our Pod is an Arena production. The Arena is South Carolina's only progressive media company. We offer commentary, podcasts, interviews, reporting, and a whole host of content. If you haven't already, please go to thearenasc.substack.com and subscribe. Welcome back. A bit later, my dear friend Chase Glenn will be joining me. Chase is one of the strongest, bravest people I know. I often get asked how I handle being so deeply immersed in advocacy and politics, especially here in South Carolina. People like Chase are the reason I get up every day and do this work. If he can keep fighting, so can I. But before Chase joins us today to share his deeply personal story, I think it's time I share mine. Now, those of you who know me know I don't like reading off scripts, but I have thought for over a year now about if, when, and how I should share this story. And this is a deeply emotional, deeply personal recounting of the events that transpired in the final months of my campaign for Congress in 2022 and in the months that followed. Some people might hear this and wonder why I even bothered to share. Some people might think I'm just complaining, that I'm just bitter that I lost my election and lost so much more. But if I just wanted to complain, if I just wanted to burn it all down, I wouldn't have waited so long to speak up. If I was just complaining, just bitter, I wouldn't be spending every day working so hard on my mission to build a better nation, a better South Carolina for our children. I would have packed up my toys and gone home, as they say. But I'm still here, still fighting, and I believe telling my story is important because people need to know who holds the power in this state. They need to know the pressure academic physicians are under. They need to know how deeply and nefariously politics has infiltrated our once lauded medical institutions. Because we can't fix what we don't understand. Awareness is the first step. I think people need to know my story because things have gotten worse, not better, since the early months of 2023. People need to know my story because doctors are being censored, silenced, quietly encouraged to leave at institutions all across the country. And similar to Project 2025's plan to fire all federal employees who have ever donated to Democratic candidates, this censorship, silencing, and non-renewal of contracts isn't happening based on clinical skills, academic productivity, evaluations from colleagues, trainees, or patients. It's based purely on politics, and it's a damn shame. I often say that I risked a lot to run, and I lost a lot as well. I lost more than most people will ever know, but I would do it all over again because what I'm fighting for is so important to me. On September 23rd, 2022, less than 2 months before Election Day, Congresswoman Nancy Mace posted her first attack ad of our campaign. She said I was, quote, too woke for the low country because I was pushing a, quote, bizarre liberal agenda that included pushing hospitals to administer gender-affirming hormones to children as young as 4. 3 days later, she posted a graphic of my face with the words, "That's child abuse," plastered across a not unflattering picture of me. She doubled down, and then she tripled down. And even though everything I was advocating for is evidence-based and in direct alignment with national and international recommendations for the care of trans people, and everything I said was in line with the American Academy of Pediatrics, she doubled and tripled down. She lied. No one at MUSC was giving hormones to 4-year-old trans children, and she knew that. In fact, no one has ever done gender-affirming surgery on minors in South Carolina. And what's more, I personally had nothing to do with the clinical care of trans youth at MUSC, except, of course, for when they were admitted to the hospital after trying to harm themselves because of bullying from adults in their lives, or when they were admitted for common pediatric ailments. But despite these lies from our sitting Congresswoman that smeared the institution, me personally, and vulnerable trans youth across the state, no one, and I truly mean no one, at the institution spoke up to defend the care of trans youth in the state or my reputation as an MUSC pediatrician. They stayed silent. A medical student was thrown into the crosshairs. No one defended him either. Rather than support, there was a growing chasm between me as an employee of the institution and the institution. I ended up taking a leave of absence, meaning not working and not getting paid, between these attacks and the election because I feared the dangerous rhetoric would continue to escalate and would result in threats against patients and families at the Children's Hospital, as we had seen in other parts of the country. I was running for Congress for kids. Of course, the last thing I wanted to do was to put them in harm's way. My fears were not hyperbolic. There were security meetings with leaders at the institution, MUSC lawyers, public safety, and other involved employees. My children's public school was notified of this safety concern. And during that time, I was told by the institution that they were choosing to stay silent to protect the vulnerable patients involved, which would have been amazing if they had actually done that. But as has already been widely reported, they didn't protect the patients, they abandoned them. They weren't protecting the patients, they weren't protecting me, they were protecting themselves. I was busy and focused on the countdown to Election Day. I stepped back from MUSC temporarily, or so I thought. I finished the campaign, I lost, and I regrouped. I met with my direct supervisor, who was relatively new to MUSC, to discuss my clinical future at the institution. I didn't know what my next political move would be. Spoiler alert, I started our nation's first and only political action committee for kids. But I knew, as someone whose whole life had been built around the goal to be a doctor, that my future had to involve clinical care of some kind. And as a full professor, previous grant-funded researcher, author of nearly 100 peer-reviewed research papers, fellowship director, director and founder of our department's advocacy curriculum, and an MUSC employee for nearly 14 years at that point, I just assumed that continuing my clinical career there would be an option. But after several months of email after email, of pleading to be put on the clinical schedule, of meetings with various leaders, not one single leader stood up for me or fought for me. I was told that my July 2023 contract would not offer any guarantee of clinical work, which, as a clinician, would be meaningless. I was told they were overstaffed. Meanwhile, they were openly recruiting other physicians into my division to do my job at the time. I was getting nowhere. Looking back, I was shocked. I was exasperated. I was hurt. Really, really hurt. I think I'm still not really aware of how much this actually hurt. I had given this institution everything. I mean, everything. Thankfully, one of my mentors from a different institution gave me some really helpful advice exactly when I needed to hear it. He said, "Annie, you can keep begging to work there, but even if you eventually get them to a yes, I don't think this is a healthy place for you to be anymore." He then said he'd be happy to have me join their faculty at a children's hospital halfway across the country. And he also suggested several other institutions that might make sense for me to contact, including Children's National in Washington, D.C. So I did. And in D.C., they welcomed me with open arms. And that is why I still live in South Carolina, but once or twice a month, I pack my stethoscope, my hospital ID, and my scrubs into my suitcase, hop on a plane, and take care of sick and injured children in our nation's capital. This situation is far from ideal. I have to spend time away from my kids, but I'm now working at an institution that values my voice and that stands up for what is right. I don't have to hide my advocacy or my political work, which, by the way, has the sole purpose of building a brighter future for our nation's children. The work that I do in these arenas is celebrated at my new institution. Now, none of this is meant to imply that the care provided for non-trans kids at MUSC is anything but excellent. I miss so many of my colleagues dearly. I miss the students and residents. I wouldn't hesitate to bring my own children there if they were sick or injured, although I recently did have to take one of my children there for an injury. And I felt a sense of uneasiness walking into the building, but I told myself that was silly. This visit wasn't about me or my history with the institution. It was about my injured child. But unfortunately, I didn't even escape that visit without an uncomfortable conversation with a leader offering me unsolicited advice on how I should have handled my exit better, about what I was doing now that was harming good people at the institution. And yes, my 7-year-old was standing right by my side while this conversation transpired. Now, I'm not an investigative reporter. Me sharing this story is not meant to uncover the details of the what I believe to be nefarious relationship between the South Carolina Freedom Caucus, the MUSC Board of Trustees, and MUSC leaders. It's not my job to do that, nor do I have the tools to do that. All I know is that I had the audacity to run for Congress as a Democrat on an agenda that was laser focused on helping children. And I lost my job at the Children's Hospital as a result. For me, there are so many lessons here, and I'm sure many more I haven't even fully uncovered yet. But this is what I have to share. Number one, your job won't love you back. Number two, go where you are valued. Life is too short to stay where your voice is not valued. Number three, the South Carolina GOP, specifically the Freedom Caucus, has deeply infiltrated our state's largest health system in a way that is misaligned with the institution's duty to serve all South Carolinians. Now, what happened to me is an extreme example. I ran for Congress in a state with some of the most extreme politics in the country. But similar stories of academic censorship are happening at medical institutions across the country. Whether it's on gender-affirming care, gun violence prevention, reproductive health care, or any other medical issue that has been tainted by politics. So if you're wondering why more of our nation's doctors aren't speaking up, please consider that it might be because they fear for their jobs. And let's use this opportunity to start asking the hard questions about who really holds the power and what we can do to remove partisan politics from our hospitals. Chase Glenn is the executive director of the Alliance for Full Acceptance, or AFFA, an LGBTQ+ advocacy organization based in Charleston, South Carolina. He is a highly regarded public speaker, workshop facilitator, and LGBTQ+ community advocate, boasting over 15 years of experience advocating for LGBTQ children, youth, and adults. Drawing from his professional training and personal experience as a transgender man, Chase delivers impactful education on the lived experiences of LGBTQ+ individuals, as well as best practices for creating inclusive and affirming spaces. Now, I am so thrilled to be joined by my dear friend, Chase Glenn, as he shares more of his story, as well as what he has observed since leaving MUSC and why he is so alarmed. All right, Chase, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of Their Future, Our Pod.
Thank you for having me here today.
So, you're welcome. So I just gave your formal introduction, but I do want to provide a little context for our listeners about how you and I came to know each other. And in preparing for today, I was thinking back to where I was when I heard that MUSC was hiring you for this incredibly important, exciting role. I was, a full-time pediatrician at the time at MUSC. I was actually sitting on the beach with my family. I got an email notification. And as a child advocate in the community, I knew of you. I didn't know you yet. And so when I saw your name and knew that MUSC had decided to hire you in this new role, I was thrilled. I was so excited. I remember sending it to some of my friends from Moms Demand Action, and it was really incredible. So, you and I have gotten to know each other very well. I think we're going to be always bonded by our shared experience of being child advocates, LGBTQ advocates in South Carolina in these very tumultuous years. And I'm grateful for that. I said at the top that the reason I do this work is because I get to interact with people like you, and you give me strength. So thank you for everything that you've done over the past 15 plus years in our community.
Oh, thank you. That's really generous. So I appreciate your words. It means a lot to me. Yeah. So got it. Yeah, go ahead. You set it up. Sorry.
Yeah. So I just kind of want to dive right in and take me back to that time for you, and when, how that transpired that MUSC, built this new role, and that, they hired you, and what that was like and what they hired you to do. And we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah. So my relationship with MUSC has been longstanding. I mean, before I ever had any sort of professional connection with them, I was a patient. I still have providers at MUSC, and, think it's one of the best, healthcare systems in the state as far as my individual providers go and my experiences with them. And through my work with AFFA, I was the executive director of AFFA from 2017 into 2021. And through that work with AFFA, had a relationship with MUSC, really positive. I mean, we partnered on a community needs assessment where we captured some data on the lived experiences of LGBTQ folks. Something had never been done before, and MUSC came along as a partner and a supporter of that project. Had really open conversations about the needs of our community, ways that MUSC could serve the community and really sort of up their game, if you will, in how they're serving LGBTQ plus folks. And honestly, it was through a lot of those conversations after we conducted that needs assessment that where we were able to point to some data that said, okay, here are people in our area, in the Charleston Tri-County area, who identify as LGBTQ, who are really struggling through everything from housing insecurity to employment insecurity to family rejection, mental health struggles. I mean, just the sort of mental health demographics, the data that we captured alone was really shocking. We found that 1 out of 4 of our adult respondents had considered suicide within the previous year. And that's like over 5 times the average for the general population. So really shocking numbers. We also captured some data specific to the healthcare experiences of LGBTQ folks in our area. And we found that the vast majority of people, were not out to their providers. Their providers didn't know their sexual orientation, didn't know their gender identity, and found that most folks hadn't even ever been asked those questions by their providers. And that was something I personally could relate to. I had never had a provider in 2017. And let me tell you, actually, I can give you the personal update. I think it was probably 2022 that I had my first provider ever ask me to self-identify my sexual orientation and gender identity. It's a very exciting day.
Wow.
But that
in 2022.
In 2022, really, that's, here we are. But Charleston, South Carolina, that was what it was like. So, I mean, showing that piece of data alone, I think, was a pretty enlightening moment for some of the folks that I, interacted with at MUSC, both in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and then out through different, physician leaders within the organization. I mean, I met with all sorts of different folks and shared that data. I felt like I was on on the road show showing, the statistics. Mm-hmm. And it started some really positive conversations where they said, you know what, we feel like we can make a difference here. We feel like as, the only academic, integrated health science center in the state of South Carolina, we have a position we can lead from. How exciting would it be to create a position that really focused on this within the institution? And I was like, yes, absolutely. I mean, I pitched my thoughts on it, honestly, not thinking I personally needed to take that job, but I had a lot of ideas about what that person could do. And I knew it would be a multi-year plan. This was not something like you could just come in on day one, even in the best of conditions, and create that sort of systemic change that needed to happen. And through those conversations, ended up finding out that they were, in fact, going to create a director of LGBTQ plus health services and resources position. And they approached me to apply for the job. And for me, I was really excited because honestly, when we got that data out of that needs assessment, I was even personally shocked by some of the numbers that I saw. And as an advocacy organization, we absolutely were trying to make connections and build partnerships with organizations and individuals in the community and across the state who could impact, and could create that change we knew we needed to see. But I just had a personal desire to be much more directly connected to seeing some of those numbers improve. And by thinking about MUSC hiring a position that was going to be focused on that was so exciting. So I threw my hat into the ring and interviewed for the job and was offered the job and accepted, with so much excitement about just the possibilities of what we could do together. And that was in 2021 that I
Okay.
went to MUSC and took that position.
Okay. Yeah, thinking back as an employee at the time, it felt like a really hopeful moment for the institution. And I'm sitting here listening to you talk, and it's very interesting because, as you know, I was deeply involved in gun violence prevention work happening at the institution at the same time. And I think I similarly had a huge sense of hope about where the institution was moving on the issue of gun violence prevention, really in parallel with where they were moving on being a loud and proud advocate for improving the healthcare of LGBTQ youth and others, and youth and adults in the state of South Carolina. And what you touched on is, your role as the executive director of AFFA prior to your employment at MUSC, you were working on these issues, but you can have such a bigger impact when you're working from within the system. And that's what I want people to understand is, there are levers of power at play. We can do our best to wake up every day as advocates and be loud and use our voices, but working within these very large, influential, powerful institutions is the most effective and efficient way to create the change that we so desperately need to see in the state.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, yeah, I wouldn't have taken the job if I didn't feel like there was leadership support for this work and
Mm-hmm.
they were saying all the right things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I really did feel like there was buy-in at, multiple levels within the institution from the top down. And, after I was hired, had really, I would consider positive conversations with leaders across the entire system, so in different divisions outside of Charleston, and just really had just really hopeful conversations. And I will say, I mean, they celebrated my arrival,
They
um,
sure did.
plastered my picture everywhere and shouted it from the rooftops, right? um, I even had
Yes.
a team member within our department who made some joke about like how they thought I was like, they were expecting to see my face on a billboard when they went down the street just because of how much press they got around this. Which, hey, if you're doing the work, you should get the
That's
press
right.
for sure. You should get the
That's right.
positive accolades and be able to be really proud about what you're doing, because it was the first full-time, director of LGBTQ plus health services or something equivalent in a large health system in South Carolina. So absolutely, they should get kudos for that.
That's right. That's right. And I think it's worth noting, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you accomplished a lot while you were there. I don't know if you want to touch on a couple of the highlights of the work that you were able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we, partnered with an outside organization, the Fenway Institute out of Boston, to create some training and educational materials for employees. And that was huge. We had buy-in from leadership to have mandatory training across the system that would address cultural competency for serving the LGBTQ plus community. We invested significant funds in shooting training videos that showed people how to do this work, how to have these conversations. That was really exciting. We created an LGBTQ plus health equity summit that ended up attracting people from across the country, and we had over almost 1,500 people register for this 2-day virtual event. And it was, I mean, probably selfish in this, but and biased, but I mean, it was a first in, best in class sort of event. I mean, we had leaders from across the country, experts, thought leaders, people who were doing this work in all sorts of different spaces and health systems. And people were just so appreciative of the event. And we had an entire archive of videos then that
Mm-hmm.
we were able to post internally that offered additional educational resources for anyone who wanted to learn more about how to work with our community. Um, we updated, we were working on updating the electronic health record system to accurately capture this data from patients.
Mm-hmm.
That was that really direct piece of data that we had from our needs assessment. Not only were patients not being asked these questions, I mean, even if they were, there was no place to put it in their record. So it was
Right.
being stuck in notes and weird places
Yep.
that didn't transfer to other people, and so it was completely inefficient, and it wasn't doing what it needed to do. So we took on an over a year long project to update the electronic health record system, and to do that really thoughtfully, and to do it using all the best practice information we had from experts in this across the country. So we were making really great strides. And I had conversations with leaders at the time who said, they wanted to make MUSC a center of transgender excellence, transgender care excellence, and they wanted that to be what MUSC could do and offer in the state of South Carolina. And let me tell you, I mean, as a trans man, I'm personally, I have a vested interest, right, in seeing something
Yeah.
like that happen, because getting my health care, I've had to go out of state at times to, you
Mm-hmm.
know, get top surgery and other things. I mean, there just aren't that
Mm-hmm.
many providers here in South Carolina that have been doing this work, at least when I first started my transition. And so we were working on some really exciting things. I wish I could say that all of those things are still in place. That probably
Right.
is one of the things that hurts my heart the most, is that we really accomplished some great things, very like tangible things.
Yes.
But the Health Equity Summit no longer happens. And that was canceled just before I made the decision to leave the institution. And the training that we produced definitely is not mandatory. And my understanding is some of it exists within their training system, but it hasn't been implemented in any sort of really meaningful way. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the electronic health record, the capability is there, but if you're not training providers and how to
Mm-hmm.
have those conversations and why they should have those conversations, then I can guarantee it's not being implemented across the board in any sort of meaningful way. So we
Right.
accomplished quite a few things. We were on the path to accomplishing even more, but we were stopped dead in our tracks.
Yeah. So you have told me that piece about the conversations you had about them explicitly saying they wanted to become a transgender center of excellence, but I had sort of forgotten that until you just repeated it, and it kind of gave me chills because it breaks my heart too to know where we are today in this situation, and to know what could have been, and what the work you were doing, incredible progress, would have been so meaningful for so many people in South Carolina. So you and I had very different perspectives on sort of what went wrong or what changed, but I would love to hear, your perspective of how it all fell apart.
Yeah. Well, it was simultaneously gradual, yet happened pretty quickly. I mean, I think what you have shared about your personal experience in the fall of 2022 really aligns with when I saw things sort of going off the rails. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I learned of many of the conversations that were happening about some really significant changes that were coming down the pike. I found out about them after the fact. So one of the first things that happened is, we knew that they were cutting off care for trans kids. The budget proviso that was passed in South Carolina stated that it was related to 16-year-olds, and so we were still hopeful that for kids that were over 16, they were going to still have access to this care. There was no reason that, their care should be cut off. And this was, again, this budget proviso was specific to MUSC. I mean, it was a perfect example of legislation and legislators targeting MUSC.
Mm-hmm.
And found out that fall that actually the decision was made they were going to go above and beyond what that proviso stated, and they were going to say they no longer would provide this care to minors who needed that gender affirming care, who are already receiving that gender affirming care. And that decision, again, I didn't even know that was happening until I saw changes on the website.
While you were in your role.
In my role, yeah. Someone alerted me to changes that said that, the care was not available, was not being provided. And I contacted leaders and said, okay, please explain to me, is this just a temporary change? Is this like we're working on the wording here and we're going to update it again? And was sort of bounced around to different people, and then ultimately had a conversation with one of the top leaders who said, no, that is the decision that's been made, and care is being stopped. Which to me, then I immediately thought, okay, really unfortunate decision. Really disappointed that I wasn't even looped in. I mean, I'm not kidding myself to think that I could have really swayed people or made impact on whether or not they would have made that decision. But just, professional courtesy, wish I had been a part of the conversation. But all that aside, okay, this is the decision that's made. Okay, how are we communicating that to patients, their families, who have been here seeing one provider who has put themselves out there? How is this going to be communicated to them in a thoughtful way that allows them to know their options going forward, and delivers that news in a compassionate way? And this is all pretty much all documented in the ProPublica piece that came out several months ago. But, I was even initially tasked with drafting some patient-centered communication that could be used and sent out to the impacted patients. And that didn't go anywhere. So as far as I know, to this day, no one ever received a message letting them know that their care was cut off. In fact, we knew of parents who were showing up to appointments that were still on the books for their children and finding out on the spot that they no longer could get what they needed. And as those experiences were having, I was getting calls from community members saying, I just went with my daughter to her appointment, and we just found out we couldn't get what we needed. What we've gotten now here for over a year, right? And we're finding this out. And so I started getting a lot of calls from people, Facebook messages, because again, I had been this public face that had been put out there as this director of LGBTQ plus health services, right? So who are you going to call? You're going to call Chase. And so that put me in a pretty awkward position to have these conversations, which I guess in theory, I was told I shouldn't have those conversations, but what am I going to do? These are my people, right? These are the people I personally know. They're people that, trust me, and I don't want to break that trust. And so that was, sort of the first chapter in a very quickly written book that told me that things were tough. They then made the decision, and I really do want to say I don't envy the people that are put in the position to make these decisions, right? There legitimately is political pressure that's being put on the institution, and that's really the root of the issue, right? I mean, if that wasn't happening, then these really horribly difficult decisions wouldn't have to be made.
That's right.
But, in an effort to try to, I guess, put the genie back in the bottle, or whatever sort
Mhm.
of metaphor you want to use, they just started proactively trying to do anything they could to try to shift attention away from what the care that was being provided and what the work that I was doing. Really, they pulled
Mhm.
down the videos, the video archive that we had from our first health equity summit. That decision
Mhm.
was made without letting me know. So I found that out after the fact. And then, sort of, the last straw, if I remember correctly, was the week of Christmas, 2022. I got a
Mhm.
phone call from my direct supervisor who said that a group of leaders had met, and they had given the directive that we were canceling the 2023 Health Equity Summit, which was happening in like 3 months. I mean, we had like
Wow.
over 18 speakers confirmed for this
Mm.
event. Um, and that was the last straw.
Yeah.
So I'm here for health services, which are being stopped. I'm here for
Right.
resources, educational resources, which we're now eliminating.
Right.
Um, what are we doing here? What am I doing here?
Right.
And so I
Right. And I think
resigned.
your point is like, this is you, this, your face was everywhere. People knew you had this position at the institution, and then they're trying to square that with what they're seeing coming from the institution. And, these are small communities. We have personal relationships with these patients and families, you more than me. And you were really put in a horrible position. And I don't want to forget to go back to this, but you said you don't envy the leaders who were getting the political pressure, because this whole story completely aligns with the rise and the growing strength of the Freedom Caucus in South Carolina, completely aligns with the last 6 weeks of my campaign for Congress against Nancy Mace and the aftermath of that. I don't envy these leaders either, but I think what we both wish we saw, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is someone with the moral courage and the strength to stand up and say, you know what, this isn't right. This is politics infiltrating science. We are the state's largest, most well respected healthcare institution. The things that we're doing are best practices, they are evidence based. And I think you and I were just both so desperate to see a leader rise to the occasion and stand up and stop what was happening, that was, we know, was harming children. And I never saw that. I never saw that leader who was willing to stand up. And I know you didn't either. So yeah, please,
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
did,
they
what
would
did you decide to
lament
do?
in private. They would lament in private, but they weren't able, or didn't feel like they were able, to stand up publicly and make that
Mm-hmm.
sort of statement, which
Mm-hmm.
extremely disappointing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So you resigned, right?
yeah. Shortly after, I came back from a holiday break, and in January of 2023, I resigned, and was very clear about the reasons I was resigning. I put it all in writing in my resignation letter, which then somehow was handed over to ProPublica in full. And so a lot of that detail can be found on in that article. So I don't need to necessarily rehash it here, but I was very direct. I didn't want them to think I was just leaving because, I have another opportunity somewhere else, or just even just basic sort of values misalignment, which I think it
Mm-hmm.
was the case. But there were very specific things that had been done that I felt like made my job impossible to do. I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
do what they hired me to do.
Right. I think that at the end of the day, that's yeah. And your resignation letter was powerful and beautifully written, and very smart of you to put it all in writing, because it's really, I think the further we get from all of this, like, the honestly, for me, the more shocking it becomes. The more I think about what happened to you and the very drastic change in trajectory at the institution, it's hard to believe that this all really transpired. Um, so so from there, like you and I have had a lot of conversations since then, again, because we sort of had to experience this together from very different perspectives. But, we've talked a lot about like, what is there to say? Is it worth speaking out? Is it worth telling our stories? Do we just seem bitter? Are we just complaining? But,
Yeah.
we're both here today having this conversation. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what has transpired since then that has motivated you to, continue to share what happened?
Yeah. So, I will preface this with saying there are still to this day providers across the health system at MUSC who are doing amazing work, who are incredible
Yes.
advocates, who are putting themselves out there, putting their, you know, everything on the line to serve LGBTQ plus people and to serve the trans
Yes.
community specifically. They are passionate about this work. They want to provide this care. And I don't want anything that I say that is particularly negative about MUSC to be, you know, described as negative towards these individual providers, because they are
Mhm.
doing the good work that has to be done in this state. And there's not a whole lot of people doing it. And there's a significant number of folks at MUSC who have committed to serving, particularly our trans community. Um,
Yes.
and so, just over a month ago, we had House Bill 4624 was passed by both our House and our state Senate here in South Carolina, and then was signed into law by Governor McMaster in May. And that law, just so you know, the crux, the core of the law is about restricting and eliminating access to care, gender affirming care for trans minors, so those who are under the age of 18. And so now we are living in a state where all trans folks under the age of 18 cannot receive that care here in our state. Um, there was also a provision in that bill that impacted the use of public funding, and the wording was both directly and indirectly from being used to provide gender affirming care to trans people of all ages.
Okay.
So that has direct impact on people utilizing Medicaid to receive this care. Those
Mhm.
people who are on our state health insurance plan can no
Mhm.
longer receive that care at any provider. Um, and we are now in a position where we've learned that MUSC is interpreting the law to mean that they can no longer provide this gender affirming care for trans folks of any age,
Mhm.
because they do receive, albeit an extremely low percentage of their annual budget from the state of South
Mhm.
Carolina. It's around 3.5% of the healthcare system's budget that comes from the state. So they have now made this plan. They have sent this directive out to the providers who provide this care. And I think it's safe to say they are reeling. I don't think many of them had any sense that this was what was going to happen. Think, and
Mhm.
that, I'll take some blame on that. Maybe as an advocate, we were really focused on communicating the impact to minors. We were communicating the impact would be to some trans adults. We knew Medicaid, the state health insurance plan, those were two very clear cut ways that we knew care would be cut off for adults. Um, but we didn't know how the law would be interpreted by health systems like MUSC. We were
Mhm.
hopeful that they would interpret things in a way that, the indirect funding, if you will, wouldn't
Mhm.
they wouldn't interpret that as meaning they needed to stop all care. But unfortunately, that is how they interpreted the law, and so here we are. I'm saying this to you today, and I know for a fact that probably the vast majority of the adult patients who receive this care at MUSC probably haven't heard this yet. And so I want to
Yeah.
just be really thoughtful in this moment, that I don't want to be the one who's having to break this horrible news to anyone. But the fact of the matter is the directive has been sent down. Providers are sharing this now with patients, and they are trying to navigate this horrible situation.
So, from a practical standpoint, as it stands today, no gender affirming care is being provided to any patient of any age at MUSC.
Correct. Little caveat is that in the law, there is some what has been described as a weaning off period, particularly for minors. Developing some sort of transition of care plan that would mean that someone, if they could receive that care elsewhere, they can be transitioned elsewhere, or particularly if they're a minor and they're going to need to stop receiving puberty blockers or hormone therapy or whatever treatment they're receiving, that they could then taper down off of that medication in a safe way. They are not seeing any new patients after August 1st, and all patients have to be transitioned out of MUSC by the end of January 2025.
Okay. That's a lot. And I think we haven't explicitly said this. I think it's implied. All of these changes are due to political pressure and now legislative activity in Columbia, South Carolina, not because our professional societies, our medical societies, the evidence, nothing has changed from a scientific or medical guideline standpoint. This is a change in the care that is provided by our state's largest healthcare institution based solely on the politics.
Yep, absolutely. The Freedom Caucus thinks they know best. I don't know that we actually have any physicians that are members of the Freedom Caucus in our state legislature. I'm pretty sure we don't.
I really hope not, Chase.
Yeah, me too. But, yeah. And let's say, the Freedom Caucus is really the tail wagging the dog up at the State House.
Yeah.
They do not make up the majority of the Republican legislators that are up at the State House. I talk to more quote unquote moderate Republicans who are dismayed and disappointed and frightened by what they see being pushed by the Freedom Caucus. But at the end of the day, because of party politics and things that probably are reasons why I will probably never be an elected official, they all just fall in line and vote with the party. And even if they privately express concern and think, this is really bad and we don't support this, and we see how this could really hurt people, they still just go along and vote the party line and vote for these types of bills. But yeah, make no mistake, the Freedom Caucus picked this bill up. Also of note, this bill is not unique to South Carolina. I'd have to check the exact number. I think we're coming up on 24 or more states across the country who have passed bills that are like this. This is one of the more harmful bills that has been passed and signed into law in a state in our country, particularly because of the adult provisions that were baked into the bill. But this is coordinated effort. You can trace these bills back to the Alliance Defending Freedom, and they churn out this type of legislation. They push it out to state legislators across the country who they know will do their bidding. And during an election year where a lot of these legislators are looking to score these cheap political points, they will just snatch that bill and file it as quickly as possible. So we saw day one in our state legislative session here in 2024. Day one, we were having a hearing on this healthcare ban bill, and so they were highly motivated to get this passed. knowing that our governor would sign it into law.
That's right. As if we have no more pressing issues the legislature should be addressing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All under the guise, of course, of protecting children.
Right. And thank you for saying that, because this is politics at its worst. This is a direct result of extreme partisan gerrymandering, because these members of the Freedom Caucus have their seats because they sit in deeply gerrymandered, deep red districts. So their only electoral concern is being primaried by someone even more extreme than them. So it is literally a race to the right. We have so few moderates that can keep their seats, because the moment they step outside of the most extreme wing of their party, we saw this just this week in our primary elections when the last Republican sister senator who stood up for women's rights was defeated in her runoff. The moment they step outside of what their party is telling them to do, they get primaried and they're gone. Yeah. And so all we see from state houses like South Carolina is a race to the right, more extremism on this issue and so many other issues. It is politics at its worst. It is using our children in these political games, and it's disgusting. And it's so dangerous and so harmful to children in South Carolina and in all these other states.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Whenever they had the ceremonial signing of this bill into law, they hosted that, the governor and a number of lawmakers, they hosted it at a church in the upstate, a bill signing. So that tells you a little bit about where we are.
Right.
And the stage was full of parents and their children, young children. And let me tell you, I mean, this legislative session has been brutal. I mean, going up to the state house, repeatedly having all of these really difficult conversations, having parents and children showing up at the state house to have these conversations with legislators, only to see them turn around and vote for the bill. There was something about that moment and watching that online where they were signing that bill on that stage at that church with all of these children, all smiling, just so happy and so proud that they were protecting children. That probably had more of an emotional impact on me than a lot of the other things that I'd witnessed, because it's just disgusting.
It is. It's craven and it's cynical. And it reminds me of the images of the Louisiana governor signing the 10 Commandments bill, where he also had children around him, including one who lost consciousness during the bill signing, and he didn't even notice because he's so child focused. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, rolling back child labor protections with children standing around her. I mean, it's those of us who actually care for children and do this work every day. There's nothing more insulting than seeing our politicians use children in their political games in this way.
Yep. Yeah, sickening.
So I believe the point of us having this conversation is because awareness is the first step towards people understanding where the power lies, how this is directly harmful to vulnerable South Carolinians, and what's at stake, so that we can formulate a plan and understand what it is we need to do to get this thing back on the rails.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of folks just, there are PR machines that work 24/7 to make institutions like MUSC and others look really great and good. And they are doing, again, really great and good things in certain areas, right? But I think a lot of people just don't necessarily have that sort of insight into the system to know just how politically connected and controlled institutions like this are. And so knowledge is power, right? And you absolutely should know that because of political pressure, we have probably, and this is just an estimate, I'm estimating over 500 trans adults in the Low Country alone who are going to lose access to their care. I'm one of them. I
Mm-hmm.
had a conversation with my provider. I will no longer be able to see her at MUSC, right? So I'm now
Mm-hmm.
with a whole lot of other people who are going to be trying to find care elsewhere. And let me tell you, our system, the number of providers we have who are providing this care out in our communities cannot absorb another 500-600 adult patients. Their caseload is already full in most cases, and they're just not going to be able to see all these people. And where does that leave us, right? The majority of
Mm-hmm.
our community is trans people. Mitch, like I said about the data that we captured through the needs assessment, I mean, this is a vulnerable population.
Mm-hmm.
A large percentage can't hold down work.
Mm-hmm.
They have been passed up for promotions in the jobs that they can keep. They experience family rejection and don't have a lot of social support. And so now we're putting a lot of pressure on these individuals to have to go out and have the resources alone to be able to go out, maybe drive and travel to get care, be able to have the time to even research where they can get that care. I mean, it's just horrible. People need to be aware, first and foremost, that this is even a thing, right? That politicians
Mm-hmm.
can have this much control over the care that just regular old human beings can
Right.
receive here in our community. Um, so knowledge is power, and I mean it sounds lofty, but we've got to use we got to use our vote. We got to
Right.
change the makeup of the state house, and it's not getting easier. You mentioned the sister senators. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
lost three Republican women who were we 100% aligned on all of these issues? No,
Mm-hmm.
but they were thoughtful individuals
Mm-hmm.
who listened carefully and thoughtfully to the conversations we had with them, that they had with community members. And I know for a fact that they, were with us to the point that they could be with us, knowing that they were being
Right.
primaried, and they were running a very difficult, primary reelection. So, um, yeah. So, but there needs to be long-term strategy about how to change the makeup of our state house here in South Carolina. And this is, as you said, not unique to South Carolina. This is happening across
Mm-hmm.
the country.
That's right. And I think sounding the alarm about the infiltration of politics into our medical institutions is really important because, in my view, there should be a wall there. Politics has no business dictating healthcare. And, like we could be having a conversation about abortion right now based on what I just said. There needs to be a wall there. And when our medical institutions feel so much pressure that they can't or they won't stand up, then the system is really going to fall apart because it's trans people today. What's it going to be? What's the next cultural wedge issue going to be the next election cycle? Because they moved on past abortion and now it's trans people. And what's it going to be next? Because none of us are
We're already
safe
talking about it,
when,
right? Contraception.
yeah,
Hey, it's up. I
yes,
mean,
yes. Yes. And so
so
like it's up to healthcare leaders, it's up to individual people within the healthcare system, it's up to healthcare leaders to stand up for science. And that sounds so crazy that we even have to say that, but it's vaccines, it's contraception, it's IVF, it's reproductive healthcare of all kinds, it's trans care. Like if we keep rolling over, I shouldn't say we, if they keep rolling over when there's political pressure, then that's going to teach our lawmakers that their political pressure works. And what's going to happen next?
yep, exactly. You may think this is, you can kind of overlook this because this is about the trans community. This is about
Yep.
one small segment of our population, but they're coming for you, no matter who you are,
Yep.
particularly if you're a woman or a child. They're coming for
Mm-hmm.
you. And if you're a member of any marginalized community, they're coming for you if they haven't already.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so this fight may be about trans people today, uh,
Mm-hmm.
but you need to be engaged because you very well could be next. Um,
You or someone you love. Yep.
exactly. Right.
Yep. Okay. So we can't end on a really downer note. Everyone needs to vote. Everyone needs to check their voter registration. Everything is on the ballot this November. Reproductive health care, trans rights, access to contraception, forward progress on gun violence prevention, action on climate change. Literally everything is on the ballot. We have to be engaged. We cannot tune out. We cannot afford to be apolitical. Our children and all other vulnerable communities cannot afford for us to tune out. But on a positive note, Chase, you continue to do incredible work in the community. So tell folks how they can find you and AFFA and how they can support the, growing important work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, we are, embedded in the work here in the state. We're committed to it. AFFA has been around for over 25 years. We started a 501c4 this past year for this very reason, this fight. We felt like we could only do so much as a C3, and we see just the extreme need for voices and advocates specific to LGBTQ plus issues in South Carolina. And so we felt like, if not us, then who? And so here we are. And want folks to be connected to the work that we're doing in whatever way feels meaningful to them. Find us on Instagram, affa.sc, that's AFFA.sc. Find us on our website, affa-sc.org. And get on our mailing list, get connected to the work that we're doing, and we will be calling on you. We need advocates on the ground, people who are willing to write a letter, make a phone call, show up at the State House, show up and support, be an ally. You don't have to be a member of our community to show up. We need our allies, maybe even more so. To be there for us and to show up and get engaged in this fight. And, ultimately, as we look down the road, we know that turning over our state house isn't something that's going to happen, and it's definitely not going to happen in 1 year. It's not going to happen maybe in 2 years, maybe even 10 years. I don't know. But we are committed to the fight and to identifying and helping raise up pro-LGBTQ candidates, doing our part to, push them forward, to give them platforms to speak and tell their stories, because we really feel like that's the change we need in the state. Everyday people like you who heed the call, have that voice inside them that says, you know what, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the person that can be that change. And so we're here to support that work and to empower people in their everyday lives to advocate for LGBTQ plus people in South Carolina.
Well, thank you so much for the tireless work you do on behalf of all of us in South Carolina, trying to create a better, more equitable state for everyone and supporting our vulnerable youth. And thank you for your time today and your openness to share your story. And I know this isn't the last conversation we're going to be having about this, but I'm so glad that this relatively horrific series of events brought us together and brought you into my life, Chase. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. I'm so grateful for you and the work that you're doing. And just so grateful to be your friend and to be able to do this sort of thing with you together. So thanks for the opportunity.
Of course.